Good morning. Today's the 12th of May. Thanks for our weekly live Q&A. We have well and truly over 110 people on board this morning. We have a panel that I've dialed in from Canberra and also coming to you from here at Tourism Top End. What I'd like to put up out the top is that today's meeting's held under Chatham House rules. If you don't know what a Chatham House rule is, it's that participants are free to use the information received, but neither the identity or the affiliation of the speaker nor that of any participant may be revealed. Why do we do this? We do this so that we can create amongst our tourism industry, retailers and hospitality, the best possible environment that we can share information, that we can use that information in our businesses. We can make decisions about that, decisions that will impact our staff, our futures. But what we don't want is anybody taking this opportunity for cheap shots out in the media. And for that matter, if there are media on, which we're grateful for the interest you're showing in tourism, thank you very much for your interest. But today's meetings are off the record, are not for anyone to be quoted, nor any association to be mentioned. This is about an information sharing that is really important to everybody on this call. From the top, I'd like to acknowledge that all the members of Tourism Top End, members of Tourism Central Australia, members of Hospitality NT, and we have Alex Bruce here from Tourism Top End, we have Michael Scott. Online, we have Patrick Bedford, Chair of Tourism Central Australia. Big g'day also to the folks with Litchfield Tourism Group, Catherine Tourism Group, East Arnhem Land Tourism Association, and our retail friends at Darwin City Waterfront Retailers Association. Today we have two speakers who we are thrilled to have us join today because we know that they've been working hard around a couple of key points in the territory that relate to our future and our future success. And as we head on this road to the new normal now, a lot of the questions and what we're looking to hear from them today will make a significant difference into what our future is. I also pass on the apologies of the Minister, the Honourable Lauren Moss, who can't be with us this morning, and also Andrew Hopper, who can't join us. But we do have the one and only Michael Bridge, Chair of Tourism NT, back with us today. So without any further ado, we might get cracking, and I might just lead today just for a bit of a recap of what tourism was happening last week. And as we saw the road map path to the new normal, what we found was a lot of prescribed activities moving forward for tourism, hospitality, retail, for nail salons, for gymnasiums, for a whole range of businesses. But there was so many of you felt you weren't picked up in any of that. And a lot of you were tour operators, cruise operators, aviation operators. People, by the nature of your business, you're in close contact with your customers on your vehicle, your vessel or your aircraft. So there was a lot of grey area in that. And I really, thanks for reaching out. I know that the team at Tourism NT also were fielding a lot of those calls. And I know that it was a really difficult week last week as we tried to get certainty around it, but there wasn't. Because there's a whole range of different metrics in play around this. But one thing that I feel comfortable, and I'm not a bush lawyer, but one thing I felt comfortable that the feedback from health was in the sense of tour operators, if the intent is true, if the tour operator is doing all they can to respect the guidelines in relation to COVID-19 and this opening up, then that will be taken into consideration. What we need to do is make sure that we follow closely the Chief Health Officer's directions, which I think is now up to number 29. It's probably moved past that, but 29 indicate that there are allowances to help Territorians and businesses. This is what the new directions did in order to meet the new principles. Importantly, for industry, infringement notices will not be issued unless there is a persistent failure to comply with the new rules. Businesses should feel confident that once their safety plan checklist has been lodged, that they will be supported to meet requirements. It's reasonable that some businesses may need to adjust processes as we all work through the very best way to achieve the new normal. So that was the note that we got late on Friday afternoon after searching down advice for so many of the members. And I know that TCA and others were doing that as well. So I think the key here is the safety plan checklist completed, uploaded, and then having a look at your business. If that's in the seating in your bus, where possible, doing checkered seating, or on your vessel or aircraft. Now, of course, the real challenge here is the commercial viability of then operating your business, and we understand that, and that's a really hard one. So it's important that that you think about that as well, because what we don't want is any member thinking that they feel pressured to get back into business only to find that the capacity that they have actually costs them money by operating and turning the vehicle on or opening up their attraction. So these are the information that we have available at the moment. Now, what I might do here, and I'll take opportunity for our colleague from Hospitality NT, Alex Bruce. I know that the hospitality sector has been giving a much more prescribed definitions on how to comply. And to answer that question, Ewan, who will issue these infringements, Only Health, I think there'll be a mix of people that I understand, but those infringements would ultimately, the decision maker would be with Health, but it wouldn't be after fair communication with yourself as an operator, and to look at ways that you can adjust your business if you were considered too close to the line. The feedback that I've got, and the feedback that I've got from working with the likes of Mark Crummy and Tourism NT, is that if you do get that call, then we're all here to give you a hand to help you work through that, to find some adjustments. And we believe that as busy and as challenging it is dealing with the Department of Health at the moment, they also will be working away for you to help you move forward. But commercial viability is really important. Commercial viability has been right in the news over the weekend, as is our good friend Alex Bruce. Alex, what's happening in the world of hospitality as we move towards this opening up on Friday?
Thanks, Glenn. Good morning, everyone. So yeah, look, venues, just like operators, are really anxious and concerned about ensuring when they can reopen, they do the right thing. Nobody wants the Bondi Beach example that we keep getting talked about, or the gotcha moment. And in past times, sometimes we haven't always got a educative, collaborative process from our regulators off the bat. Sometimes they do come in swinging baseball bats from time to time. And so there was a fair bit of concern from the hospitality side of the same coin, with regards the public perception is we're all good to go and we're automatically viable come this Friday, even though with all of the things that have been announced to date, ultimately the capacity restrictions are still very challenging for a lot of businesses, not to mention any that rely on the tourist spend when those tourists aren't up here. So we've been working with Glenn as well and sharing information across the sphere. We find out when you guys find out and vice versa. And we pressed yesterday. Firstly, we got really good communication from Jamie Chalker, the police commissioner. He made it abundantly clear that the instructions for his officers will be to be educative first, to walk in there. He's not expecting to be seeing venues or operators fined in the first instance. It really is on the community to behave the right way as they interact with more and more sections of industry as we reopen. And we were quite heartened to hear that that was his direct personal approach. Yesterday, police met with environmental health plus the chief health officer. Under the chief health officer's directions, police can enforce the chief health officer's directions, just like environmental health guys that we all know come through our venues from time to time. So it was important for them to get on the same page. And we understood that happened yesterday, which gives us, again, more comfort heading into Friday. But there were a range of questions out of the guidelines that were published last week, and a lot of common questions that were raised. So we got more clarification particularly with regards food and beverage and venues this coming Friday that are reopening. But I'll just quickly rattle off on some of these because similar principles you can see being adopted across a range of industries as they're reopening. So we got clarification yesterday for the stage 2 reopenings that are starting this Friday. Groups of up to 10 can be seated at the same table, and they are responsible for their own social distancing within that group or bubble, as people talk about and the Chief Health Officer talks about. Patrons have to be seated when not ordering. So they can go to the bar, they can go to the cashier, they can go and use the facilities and have to come back. There's no standing groups at this stage. Venues, the obligation is that we must ensure the 1.5 metres between different groups of people. Different groups can sit back to back, and the distance between the offending chairs, if I can put it that way, has to be 1 metre or more, which again is nation leading and makes the overall restraints and capacity restrictions the best on show for us, and provides that missing piece of how do venues potentially put out their layout, their floor plan. Individuals in a group cannot move from one group to another, and that's kind of self-explanatory when you look at, in good faith, the Chief Health Officer up here has broken ranks with the rest of his colleagues down south and is allowing a bubble of people known to each other, so that's friends, family, not just household group, to go into a venue, interact in that venue, and then leave again. It's all about the traceability, we understand, so they don't want mingling between the groups, and that's the responsibility for operators or venues, which gives us some level of comfort. Obviously, that will be a challenge with some customers, but we've just got to be abundantly clear, and it's probably easier to achieve whilst we're in this sit-down only operating environment until the 5th of June. So that gives a couple of weeks for the public to get used to how they interact or don't interact. It's okay to wave to someone you know in another group, obviously, but don't go and table hop, please. Signage is critical, and we've been pushing the NT government for a while now to try and get their signs out. But as some of this clarification and the meeting of the minds from the different parts of the agencies involved was occurring up until yesterday, we cut them some slack. We're hoping to get the signs from the government on Wednesday or Thursday to distribute to members. And yet, whilst we would have liked more time, the reality is we'll push them out and strongly encourage all industry that are participating on Friday reopenings to put them up. Venues are strongly encourage patrons adhere to the 2 hours. And that is absolutely something you'll see in the signs, and it'll be the way the bookings are communicated to customers and everything else. Importantly for us, though, it's not going to be an enforceable requirement in the Chief Health Officer's directions. So that stops some of the worst fear of, a month from now, them getting your CCTV footage, them finding someone that overstayed the 2 hour limit, and despite best endeavours, a liability accruing to the venue. We understand that that won't be the case, which, again, I've got to acknowledge is quite a pragmatic outcome from the regulators in government in that regard. There does seem to be a high degree of goodwill to try and give business the certainty and try and calm down some of the anxiety about reopening and how we're all going to do that. So it's not something we'll be out there directly publicising, obviously, and promoting. And in fact, it's made very clear to us that we will absolutely, when you come into our venues, you'll be seeing the 2 hour sign limits, and that will be the expectation. But yeah, there just isn't that sting in the tail to that one for us, which we're happy about. Even two more things, if I can, just simple things like, did you have to order the meal at the time you walk in to get your first drink? No, you can't. You don't have to. Patrons can order a pre-drink, settle in, enjoy peruse the menu before they make their order. Obviously, you've got to be treating that in the spirit of the intent of the principles from the Chief Health Officer. So one drink's probably okay, but you wouldn't do a second and a third, and then they get up and they've breached your rules by not having a meal and just having a drink. And venues have to be a bit auspicious in the way they make sure, if they think that there is a flight risk, they would encourage that table to get their food provision satisfied earlier than perhaps another group that's making it clear that they're there for the 2 hours and they're going to look at the menus and order something in good time, you can serve them ahead of time. So we think that makes it more workable again. And then just the final thing was, police and environmental health met and discussed the need for consistent approach, focused on community engagement and education. So that's where we're standing. We're going to put some additional material out with some messaging from an industry perspective in terms of making the community and customers aware of what the obligations are when they come to our venues, consistent with all of the rules. And so we'll probably be in a position to share that later today, maybe tomorrow.
Mike Scott, not only you are our esteemed Chair of Tourism Top End, you're also a restaurateur here. How does this sound from a practical sense? This working it through your business, do we open, do we not? Are these areas that give you comfort or create more questions?
I think that some of the idiosyncrasies that have been covered off by Hospitality NT will be really helpful, not only to pubs and clubs, but also to restaurants. And I think that some of the keys there are things that we haven't known, such as back-to-back chairing of a meter, all of which I think is really smart. Can't move from one groove to another, but you can wave. I'm sure there'll be a lot of waving. But the elephant not in the room that isn't covered off on this, but may have been covered off in, this is update number 374, license capacity. And compared to down south, there is a lot of speculation down south with, if you're only allowed 10 in your restaurant, well then people won't open. But there's no reference to license capacity here. And maybe is that because it's sort of still in the too hard basket?
We've asked and raised in this forum a couple of times the concerns about a hard, strict one person per 4 square metres, and that has been picked up. So if you look at any other jurisdiction, even if, like in Adelaide, they've got a 10 people in the coffee shop overlay to it, there's also, you must always have 1 person per 4 square metres, which is that hard 25% capacity restriction that we've all expressed concern about previously. There's one reference to it in the food guidelines that is the jumping off point for venues to try and consider what their capacity would be. It's how long is a piece of string, because depending on your size of your bubbles and the way they interact, and 1.5 metre between bubbles will ultimately give you an answer for that setting. And you might be able to change it as your bookings roll through, or walk-ins, you're obviously going to be more conservative with your table configuration. So what I would say is it's not a hard 25%. Some people are making sure that, they probably don't go over 50%, but it's probably going to be somewhere in the 30 or 40% range, depending on the configuration, literally per setting, as different groups are rolling through. There is no limit to the number of a booking. You just need to break them up into groups of 10. So
we've got Charles Darwin, Matt's department, working on this.
Yeah, and so there was the compromise in, if we press the government further for a hard and fast, nationally agreed to rule, it was a case of be careful what you wish for. We did want to be able to show and be given the flexibility that we could adhere to the principles that they wanted to achieve with regards health, tracking and tracing and not intermingling and all of those things, without just a clear 25% restriction cap, because yes, even at 50%, a lot of restaurants will struggle. Even without the tourists, a lot of restaurants will struggle, and no pub with the majority of its offerings still closed in just providing a limited 40% food and beverage is not in a viable position. But JobKeeper's probably masking that a lot.
You're right. Okay. Well, Alex, mate, well done to you and your team. You've done a lot of work in this over the weekend at very short notice and putting this together and creating as much certainty as possible for members in the hospitality sector. So your leadership in this has been terrific, mate. Thank you very much. We're grateful that we always have Michael Bridge join us on these Tuesday mornings, and having access to the chair of Tourism NT, who are at the forefront of everything that's happening in tourism. Last week, we know, Michael, that your team was working really hard in putting together a range of fact sheets because we weren't able to get the prescribed certainty that hospitality's been able to get. So from a quick, anything from a Tourism NT update, and for those of you who have been following this, and last week you'll know also that there was a tourism task force stood up, and whilst I know that Michael can't share anything of that, just if there's anything in terms of how that's going. So Michael, thanks for joining us. I'd like to throw over to yourself for a Tourism NT perspective.
Yeah, thank you, mate, and good morning, everyone, and congratulations to Alex and the team at Hospitality NT. I think it's fantastic, these initiatives, and also to health and policing and the like that are going to support them. Can I first say apologies on behalf of our Minister and Hops? They're actually both in budget review subcommittee this morning fighting for money for our industry, so they send their apologies. I'll be relatively quick because I'm pretty sure you're here to hear from both James, and welcome James from Parks Australia, and also Sally here from NT Parks. Just a couple of things from Tourism NT's perspective. First of all, there's been some interesting statistics that have come out in the last couple of days, predominantly driven around TripAdvisor and Qualtrics, that the most common activity to spend money on when the pandemic is over is eating in a cafe or restaurant. Not takeaway, but actually eating out in a cafe or restaurant, ranked 44% of people wish to do that. More interestingly, from a tourist perspective, 67% of Australians will travel within 2 months after the restrictions are lifted, predominantly road trips and winter breaks, escaping the southern winter. But most interesting is 98% of Australians expect to travel within 5 months after the restrictions are limited, which is obviously a huge opportunity for us here in the Northern Territory. We're still trying to work on the demand side of things, trying to gauge what our two major markets, being Victoria and New South Wales, will be from a demand perspective after the easing of restrictions, and that's predominantly being driven around their propensity and the capacity to actually travel, given some will have used annual leave, some will have taken leave without pay, some will see their super balances significantly reduced, and the like, and a lot of people will probably be at the mindset to put it off, as opposed to spending more money over a longer period of time to come to somewhere like the Northern Territory. As far as the task force is concerned, we met for the second time last Wednesday. I've also had a ministerial briefing and a briefing with the Chief Minister since then as well. We're meeting with Dr. Heggie this afternoon and the Deputy Diane, predominantly around the biosecurity zones, but also just trying to get a feel for those broader issues surrounding our borders opening at some point in the future. Tomorrow afternoon we have Andrew David, the CEO of Qantas Domestic, who's currently in isolation in northern New Zealand, who will be joining us by video conference and briefing the task force on where he sees recovery going from there. In my discussions with the Minister and the Chief Minister, probably the main priority that's come out, the main message going back, is we need a date for the borders opening. And it's had explained to me by numerous people the challenges in doing that, and they are far afield challenges. However, I can assure everybody that there is an appreciation within our elected representatives that we're not an industry that can open in 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, and we have to be given as much notice as possible so that we can push out the required marketing to ensure that not only do we open at a given date, but we can open sustainably at a given date. It's also been made quite clear to us by a number of the major operators, not just on the task force, but those that we've spoken to and those that are contributing, that if they don't generate cash flow later this dry season, later this busy season in Central Australia, that it simply won't be possible, or they won't be capable of sustaining the low season in both jurisdictions, both north and south, and hence will probably choose not to open till March or April next year, which would be a catastrophic situation for the Northern Territory to be out of the market for 12 months, post JobKeeper in September, October and the like. It would be completely devastating. So that is appreciated by our elected representatives, and they are working hard to give us that level of surety. Aviation connectability, again, another pretty obvious one, but considering my previous comments about the over-dominance of business travel into the Northern Territory, it's one that we are struggling with going forward, and the new norm in aviation services will be such that we will have a lot less direct, more indirect, higher airfares, reduced schedules and the like, and that's something that we just need to be mindful of when we start considering going forward. There's been a big desire to, I spoke last week about a record amount of money is going to be dumped, and probably not the best terminology, but dumped into the intra-territory market, predominantly through our RTOs and also tourism NT. There will also, on top of that, be a real focus on our domestic market for the next 9 to 12 months, again, for obvious reasons. While some borders might start, some international borders might start relaxing or being opened by Christmas, they're unlikely to be our predominant or strong international markets. And most of those international markets, if not all, are travelling via other ports which have their own challenges at this point in time. And so genuine return to international capacity we see being at least 9 to 12 months off. The other thing which is interesting, particularly given some of the challenges that hospitality NT and that industry is going through at the moment, is the need to adopt some national guidelines at a set point in the future. Whilst we lead Australia and possibly lead the world in easing these restrictions, in some way we're going to be used as a test case, and hopefully we're going to come through with flying colours and have no issues, etc. Where the message basically is that whilst we are working around those, we have to be really careful that we don't put into place any sort of regulations or legislations that might end up being different to those in other states or territories, particularly here in Australia. And I think I used in this forum last year a situation where we can't have the GAN pulling up at the NT border and everyone changing seats because our social distancing requirements are different to what they are in South Australia. There will be differences, and those differences certainly will be the case over the next 3 to 6 months as we all adapt to the new norm. However, we do need national guidelines. The limitation on someone in a pub in Brisbane who's subsequently going to travel to the Northern Territory needs to be aligned when we get into this new norm. So that's probably about it from me. I'm happy to take questions as I do at the end, and it's probably more appropriate that you hear from our parks people.
Michael, thank you very much, and thanks for that update. There's a lot of information, and I would just take this opportunity to remind everybody on this call that these meetings, we hold them under a Chatham House rules, that the participants are free to use this information. That's what this forum's all about. It's for you to be able to think about that in the context of your business, commercial viability of your business, what's happening, sharing of this information. But neither the identity or the affiliation of any of our speakers today can be used outside of this meeting. So that's how we get people to share honest information and as much as they can, as Michael just did. Today we're thrilled to be joined by Dr. James Findlay, who's Director of National Parks with Parks Australia, and also Sally Egan, Executive Director of Parks and Wildlife NT. What I might do, so we in the Northern Territory, of no surprise to anyone on this call, including our guest speakers today, parks are at the heart of tourism in the Northern Territory. It's one of our greatest assets besides our people. So not knowing what's going on, what's happening, this update, our industry, it's on every conversation that's been happening. What's happening at this time? What's happening with biosecurity? What are the triggers? What are the markers? What can we expect coming out of this so that we can lead with what are the crowns and our jewels. And also that we also get that there's been challenges in relation to traditional owners and access, which is very much part of the biosecurity question. So without any further ado, I might firstly ask Sally Egan to give us an update from Parks and Wildlife NT. Then we'll throw to James Findlay, and then we'll look to throw some questions around to help share this information. Again, please, we ask for everyone that this is a meeting where people have that opportunity to answer those questions, responsible questions. This is designed to help everybody on this call get some information in order to think about what their immediate future and long-term future looks like. So, Sally Egan, thank you very much for joining us.
No worries. Thank you, everybody, for having me. So I'll just run down a bit of a list of where we're at with national parks in the Northern Territory, and a lot of you will know this, and I apologise in advance, but just in case someone doesn't, I'll start at the top. So in the beginning, not everything in Parks NT was closed, so we made an effort to keep enough recreation nodes open so that the livability part of the parks charter was upheld, and we did variously well on that, depending where we were in the landscape. On the 1st of May, of course, we were allowed to open some more parks and reserves, particularly where they were excluded from the biosecurity zones. And of course, we couldn't open everything. We have things that are still closed down because the crocodile clearances and the water levels and water quality conditions that we need aren't met. But we did open a goodly number of things in the top end, and unfortunately, because of the way the biosecurity zones fell, we were unable to do any further work in other areas across the territory. We do have parks that are open out in the biosecurity zones, and they are open because we wanted to leave some things available for people who live within a biosecurity zone to go and do. So, for example, we left Judborough Gregory open so that the people from Timber Creek had somewhere to recreate. And that's led to a bit of confusion, and we have had to be very careful with our messaging that it's not an invitation for people to cross biosecurity zones to visit those parks. Opening of additional parks will occur in time, so we will be able to open extra swimming areas and extra parts of parks as things dry out after the wet season and four-wheel drive tracks open up, and also as we do the crocodile clearances and we can get people back to swimming. Again, that will mostly be in the top end until something changes with biosecurity zones. Parks and Wildlife staff have been continuing with business as usual, so we went through the process of getting ourselves a pandemic management plan and getting remote essential worker clearances for parks staff who are out in remote locations initially so that they could resupply the park, and then also so that they could get out there and continue with their planned burns, weed management and infrastructure maintenance. They've been doing things like opening Jatbilla Trail in the hope that we might be able to get people back on it, and also they've done the pre-season opening of the Larapinta Trail. And it was an opportunity for us to go around and do a lot of small tidy up jobs that we might not have ordinarily got time to do because we would have been in a very, build up to the busy season. There are, a series of capital works projects and minor new works projects that are being completed in readiness for the season. So 3 new campsite shelters have been completed on the Larapinta Trail in readiness for the 2020 season, and a new section of the trail was completed in 2019. Sealing of the Litchfield Park access, Cox Peninsula Road is due to be completed in 2021. Upgrades to the campground at Kalu Devil's Marbles has been completed. We've been working on campground hosting facilities at a number of major park campgrounds, and that's, sort of a bit fitty and starty at the moment while we wait and see where all of this lands. The turbocharging tourism projects are progressing. In particular, the works at Litchfield National Park are continuing at Central Valley. Access roadworks are expected to be completed by June 2020. Campground four-wheel drive tracks, campground day use and facilities design will continue in 2020. Capital works at Nitmiluk are well advanced. So the new mountain bike trail has 2 sections complete and the final 2 are well underway. And there are also the mountain bike hub structures in place. The visitor centre refurbishment is nearing completion and all works are expected for completion by the dry season 2021, but that will be very much, or would be very much, in a workable condition this season. I think that's about it for the list of things that I was going to say. So I'm quite happy to open it up for questions.
Yeah, I think there's probably a couple of things that are a little bit pertinent to in particular, NT parks. And one of them was challenges that we know our rangers feel, and a lot of our tourist industry feel quite challenged about that which they've seen in recent weekends, where there's a question around, there's a lot of people in swimming holes and worried that their enthusiasm to enjoy swimming in Litchfield could ruin it for the tourism industry, for those that operate around the likes of Litchfield, and we use that as the example, and any potential for tour operators to go in there. We understand that parks rangers don't have the authority. Are you getting the support? Are you able to give us some insight as to how we can avoid that before that becomes a Bondi issue?
So park rangers do have authority. So a park ranger can ask somebody to leave a national park and they can write infringements if they fail to follow a direction. Like everybody, however, we are in the space of encouraging good behaviour rather than booking a lot of people, and that's sort of been the messaging right down the line. If we're going to be offering people, you know, assistance to behave well through something like this, we have to offer everybody that assistance to behave well. The police have been incredibly supportive, particularly last weekend. So it was a major operation to get things open, and we were expecting that it would be very busy, and we were expecting that there would be some, you know, joie de vivre that might encourage risk-taking behaviour. Can I put it like that?
Mm-hmm.
So last weekend, the long weekend, we had a big effort to make sure that there was enough guidance out there in the landscape to help people to behave well. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, this weekend just gone, we didn't think that we needed such a huge investment in managing people. So we backed off a little bit. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, the behaviours that we had at Litchfield in particular this weekend just gone were bad. Mm. And so we're now working towards how we might get some more stable, sustainable, ongoing support into that space for the remainder of the drive.
Yeah, it's certainly a tough one, isn't it? All this pent-up demand, all this cabin fever, and the opportunity to go, and they're in there, I can get in there as well. Yeah. We get your pain, and we thank you for your sharing of that, because I know that the industry feels that, and they feel quite concerned about that, and again, would hate to see it closed down, a decision made by authorities above parks to say, well, health makes a call that we're closing that down. There's been, Sally, a number of our tour operators are asking about their park permits and their fees and their operating fees, and is NT Parks been able to work with, for this period of time where they're coming into what would be their normal season, in terms of their park fees, their permits to operate? Yep.
So we have developed a package of what we think we might be able to do in terms of extensions, refunds, waivers, and obviously it's a complicated mix because we are a complicated mix of arrangements across parks. I can't say too much about refunds and waivers at this point in time. We are required to get some approvals from Treasury, and also in joint managed parks, we have to negotiate what part of somebody's fee or permit it is that we can refund or waive, because some of that money goes into joint management coffers. For the tourism operator permits, though, I can say that we're just going to extend all those for a year.
Okay.
Because by the time you break down the number of months that parks were closed and people were operating, and the price that they pay for their permit, the administration cost was greater than any benefit that anyone might get. So if we just do it for a year, it gives people an extra year not having to worry about it, and it also gives us an extra year of not having to worry about it.
Well, that's good news, and thank you very much for sharing that. I'm sure there'll be more questions, both from Central Australia and we'll come back to Sally. At this point, welcoming James calling in from Canberra, and by the fact that you're got your woolies on there, mate, we can tell you're not enjoying territory weather there today.
No, not at all, Glenn.
Thank you for joining us. Today, we're very interested to hear about both Kakadu National Park and Uluru-Kata National Park. Biosecurity have cast very much a blanket over that with roadblocks, with not a lot of information about what's going on, where you're up to, and we know that there were some aspirations. So we're keen to hear your updates, James, of what Parks Australia has been able to achieve, is working on, and some markers for the industry looking forward.
Yeah, look, great. Thanks, Glenn, and look, thanks everybody for your time. As Glenn mentioned, yes, it's for people who can't see me, it's bloody cold down here, so -2 here this morning in Canberra. So I think Michael mentioned earlier people's desire to get away from the south and head north once those border restrictions are lifted. So mornings like today will force people north as quickly as possible. So some optimism for the tourism industry. Look, before we go any further, I just wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you to everybody. We, like everyone, of course, we're dealing with a fairly rapidly changing situation coming into all of this, and I think this is the first time I've had a chance to talk to all of you together, and really appreciated all of the sort of support and understanding we got out of tourism operators across both our parks as we led into the various restrictions. We obviously went about a week ahead of the biosecurity zones being introduced into the NT because we were able to move just a little bit quicker to keep people safe. But I expected we might have some tourism operators which understandably quite upset about that, but and we might get a bit of reaction in the media. But can I just say, I'm so impressed by the way people pulled together and understood that, you know, while their businesses were important, keeping people safe was more important. And I just wanted to acknowledge that. Also want to acknowledge the help we've had from the Kakadu Board of Management, also the Northern Territory Government and the Australian Federal Police and Defence Forces as well throughout this time. It's been first class, but you know, tourism operators absolutely doing it tough. You know, you guys have all, of course, had lots of uncertainty in business. I've had people, understandably, you know, crying on the end of a phone and things like that about their world. And look, it's been bloody difficult. We all know that. So I'm really keen to get people back in business as soon as we can, or at least the opportunity to get back in business as soon as they can. And today I'm really here about trying to make sure that we provide as much transparency and certainty as we can so that you can start planning for that. But at the end of the day, we are, I think, still in a fairly uncertain situation right across. I have the pleasure or displeasure of working across 5 different jurisdictions. Can I just say, you know, testament to Sally and her crew, but also testament to the Northern Territory Government. I've got to say it's probably the most pragmatic set of arrangements we've seen across that jurisdiction. My wife, for her sins in a past life, is also the chair of the Business Events Council of Australia. So she's been dealing across all the jurisdictions plus at a national level. And you know, the NT government approach has been pretty bloody refreshing, I think, for everyone across that. So I know it's difficult, but probably consider yourselves fairly lucky at the moment about where things are going and where we're headed. And hopefully, if we stay on these sorts of trajectories with cases and the health response, we can get people back into business, at least for inter-territory sooner rather than later. Look, just moving to what's happening in Kakadu and where we're going, and I'll move to Uluru in a moment. Look, so since the closure's been in place, we've been a bit like Sally's crew, working hard to keep things sort of business as usual and get on with stuff. Also taking the opportunity with people or visitors out of the park. Obviously, we've got a lot of people in the park, but with visitors not able to get into the park, take the opportunity to do some of those works that would otherwise be hard to do during the dry season. So a lot of work on car parks, fixing various structures, getting things cleaned up, you know, tweaks to toilet blocks, a lot of ranger housing getting cleaned up as well. So that's been a little bit constrained by the biosecurity zone and trades, and had a few hold-ups getting people across borders, which is understandable. Working our way through that pretty well. But if health advice allows us, and I want to put a caveat on that, we're working towards being able to reopen Kakadu on the 19th of June. And so that'd be virtually all of the sites that would normally open at this time of year, depending on seasonal restrictions for others, of course. As Sally mentioned, still doing some work on those areas that are still a bit wet. But that's what we're working towards at the moment. I don't want people to run out and say that we are opening on the 19th, but that's what we're currently working towards. But as Sally mentioned, and Michael mentioned, there's still conversations going on about those biosecurity zones, both north and south for us. But on the assumption that things go the way they are, that it might be possible that those restrictions expire, or the current expiry date on the 18th. We're working to be open on the 19th. It has required a hell of a lot of work, but I think the guys have done a really good job. Obviously, we've had a lot of casual staff that lost their jobs out of the park as well, so we've been able to take up some of those and keep things moving. Just on the $216 million package, a lot of that work's been continuing at pace. But again, we've been held up with some of the traditional owner and other consultations we need to do to keep that work moving for the start of the dry season. We're hoping to get the Kakadu Tourism Master Plan and the Kakadu Road Strategy in front of the board very shortly. And a number of other projects there. We actually hope, after conversations with ARPA and NLC, and hopefully a bit of help from the Northern Territory Government more broadly, we'll be able to push a few things over the line and get that going. So broadly on track, probably held up a little bit in terms of those consultations, and I'm sure people understand that Northern Land Council lawyers and others can't travel across that biosecurity zone, and with some of the IT facilities being available to traditional owners, not quite what we've got here today in terms of being able to do a Zoom call. It's just made things a little bit harder in terms of consultation. So keep on keeping on, but we'll be okay. So in terms of Uluru, working to a similar sort of timeline, the question for us there, so in the case of Kakadu, only between 13 and 16% of the visitors that go to Kakadu are international visitors. We're dealing with largely domestic base. A third of all the visitors into Kakadu are actually Northern Territorians. So we think Kakadu is probably offering a bigger opportunity in terms of that early stage of opening, in terms of the stage approach towards a new normal, as others have mentioned. We're not sure what that'll mean for Uluru. We're not sure whether we'll, if and when the border's opened, whether we'll see a massive influx of caravans across the border and they'll pull into Uluru, and if so, what does that really mean for voyages and other businesses locally that depend on that sort of traffic. But we know that it's something between sort of 44 and 48% of visitors in the last 3 years to Uluru have been international visitors, so that's going to be the last thing that restarts. So it's hard to know what that domestic market's going to look like for Uluru in the short term, so all the associated flow on from that. We also know that in terms of the associated local businesses, that it's more like 2/3 of their, so the guys who do the walking tours and the segways and other bits and pieces, it's more like 2/3 of their customers are actually overseas. So that's going to be a bit of a challenge, I think, in terms of coming out of this. So Glenn, so most people would probably know, so I mentioned, obviously Sally mentioned the fact they're working towards the waiver of fees and other charges. We were lucky enough to get agreement out of the federal government to waive those fees and charges a little while ago, so that's been announced. If you haven't heard about that, we can get some information out through Glenn and the crew. For people who have a license or a permit to access Uluru or Kakadu, you don't need to do anything. We've got your bank details or other details, and that information will that money will just come back to you. And so in the case of fees and license charges for commercial operators, we're going back to the 1st of January this year and waiving or otherwise reimbursing those fees right through to the 1st of March next year. So and that's we've been lucky enough to get the money out of government to enable us to do that, which is good. So it's not impacting my operating budget, which is great. Similarly, we've been able to maintain payments to traditional owners in both the parks for both that and for visitor fees. The visitor fee waiver will remain in place until December this year, and obviously it's no news at the moment whether or not we'll be revisiting that or continuing that, but obviously when we do open, probably not a huge deal because Territorians don't pay to access our parks anyway, but once the borders do open, that lack of an entry fee might help get a few people across the border. Certainly some of the great nomads, we know that was a bit of an obstacle to them in the past. So look, Glenn, we're continuing to do things we normally do. So birding programs underway, work with NT government and others on getting crocodile clearance done. So it's sort of just getting things back to normal, but happy to answer questions. I'm sure there's lots of questions that I probably haven't covered, so I'll maybe stop there and give some time for questions, Glenn.
Thanks, James. I think we could open. There's a couple of the ones that certainly have been front and centre for a while now, and that relates to. I think that we'll come back to that which has not been able to be achieved or has been delayed, but any updates around Gunlom, any updates around Twin Falls, and in terms of your projections in light of the circumstances now of when that will open and what will that look like?
Yeah, so there's the 3 locations. I might start with Magook if that's okay. So the top pool of Magook remains closed. We were hopeful of getting the coronial report before we reopen that. We're still hopeful of getting the coronial report before that's reopened. Obviously, until we get that report, I'm a little bit nervous about what it might say and what it might mean for visitors going up to the top pool. But certainly the bottom pool will be reopened in line with that. So we're expecting that to be reopened on the 19th or whenever we reopen the park. At Gunlom, we're still in negotiation. Obviously, for people who don't know, the newly refurbished Gunlom walking track was completed last year, and we think it looked pretty good, and certainly had a lot of good feedback from traditional owners and others who've been up and had a look at that and been involved in its construction. Unfortunately, it would appear that at least one traditional owner actually made a formal complaint subsequently to Territory ARPA. And they're now running a formal investigation about potential impacts on sacred sites. Discussions between ARPA, ourselves and Northern Land Council are continuing, and until those have been resolved, we won't be able to open Gunlom walking track again, unfortunately. Obviously, we're hopeful that will happen any day, but sort of there's negotiations still to occur there. At Twin, we're still hopeful of that work going ahead, and this dry season, so to get the Jim access road there upgraded and get certainly 6 months, if not longer, access all year round. We're still hopeful of that work going ahead. There are some traditional owner and other consultations which have been held up slightly, and we're meeting with the powers that be later this week to try and accelerate those conversations and get that work back on track. So that's still the plan. So at the moment, it will remain closed for this dry season with a view to opening it next year. If it becomes apparent in the next couple of weeks, and certainly well before the 18th of June, we'll be able to make this decision. If it becomes apparent that we're not going to be able to finalise those consultations and make a decision on doing the works this year, we may be in a position to reopen it this year to vehicles that are suitable to cross. But I know that a number of the traditional owners are quite keen to get that work done. I'm quite keen to get the work done. Water Management's quite keen to get the work done. So it's a matter of getting those formal consultation requirements with ARPA and NLC knocked off as quick as we can.
James, one of the real challenges for our tourism industry here is, of course, that as Territorians are able to travel, this hasn't been a transport crisis, it's been a health crisis. So people can pick up their own car, their tent is an extension of their home, and they can then get out to the parks and spend their time. But it's the tourism operators who are left without customers because people don't immediately think, I'll hop on a vehicle, whatever size vehicle or tour operator that is, to go and access some of these of our most gorgeous places in the Territory. Are there any opportunities in the reopening that some of our tour operators might be able to be given given some opportunity to access some parts of the park that won't be necessarily immediately open? And I think there's a couple of reasons that we've sustained for that. We'll present that to you, that they're operators that are accredited tour operators. They're operating in a controlled environment. We absolutely know that they'll be delivering the information that traditional owners care most about, and being able to really work within the capacity limits. Has there been much consideration around that, and is that something that Parks Australia might be open to?
Yeah, look, so we have had some conversations about that, and we're up for it, but people would need to have a conversation with us, and I encourage people to do that sooner rather than later, about where they might want to go and how they might want to organise that, and both how they can obviously make sure that they're reassuring us that they're not damaging the cultural and environmental values of some of those areas, but also about how they can meet the safety requirements that of the day, whatever they may be, because obviously chucking a bunch of people into a vehicle is fine, just depends where they're all from at the moment in terms of the current rules. So that's something we'll need to just be aware of as well, in terms of what permits we're issuing and not giving false hope to people. So one of the good things, Glenn, we have been obviously very keen to continue promotion around both our parks, and if people haven't seen it yet, there's a Google tracker tool has actually been, that's the highest volume of traffic we've had both domestically and internationally, so that gives you a sort of virtual tour of both Uluru and Kakadu, which we think is really great. And this weekend, coming, obviously, Tourism Australia is holding their Australia Live event as well. I'm not sure if NTG's Sally or others are tied up with that, but we'll be participating in that, which is the Australia Live campaign from Tourism Australia, which is going to be promoting Uluru in particular for this weekend's event. So that's really good. But if people have got ideas about going to parts of the park that they maybe haven't been to before, haven't been to for a while, and want to have to talk to us about that, we're all ears. So.
Good idea. I think Michael Bridge, Tourism and Tea have been doing a fair bit of work around this, haven't they?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, no, we're very much entrenched within that Australia Live initiative from Tourism Australia. So it will showcase the entire Northern Territory.
Yeah, so we're really hopeful that the restrictions can lift before that. In terms of access, so a decision's made about lifting the biosecurity. The implications for tourism is very different to that of resident Territorians who can just literally fuel up, go to Woolies, pack up, get on the road. We have all of our tour operators, in the main, many of their staff are stood down still. Their vehicles are parked in sheds. And then we've got the likes of Chris Chafe sitting out as General Manager of the Croc Hotel and Benjamin Brown at Coinda operating with a real skeleton staff operating as caretakers at facility. What opportunities are there on an embargoed front once there is a sense of we're heading towards this date that we might be able to share in confidence with select operators that this is the date we're moving towards, you can start gearing up now?
Yeah, so look, with the caveat being that obviously we're still going, any of this will be dependent on decisions taken by somebody else, in this case, a Federal Health Minister, Minister Greg Hunt, in consultation, I think, as Michael and Sally mentioned as well. Obviously, there's still considerations to go on in other areas and other portfolios. We're working towards the 18th of June being the end, and that for the most part, those biosecurity zones will be largely lifted or entirely lifted as they're currently constructed. So we don't know if that's the case. And I want to be really clear about that. So if there's an extension, then obviously we will all be bound by that. But anyway, that's what we're working towards, so that opportunity is there. I'm quite, so information, that information went out to the Kakadu Tourism Consultative Committee on Friday.
Yep.
And so I'm happy for that information to be shared on the basis of that caveat's also recognised. So a bit like we did on the way in, I appreciate people's understanding. We'll be transparent and provide as much certainty as we can. We're certain we'll be able to open on the 19th of June if the biosecurity zones are lifted. It's just that last bit. I don't want to have people drop off and say, well, we went and geared up and put staff back on and filled up the trucks and we're waiting at 1 past midnight on the morning of the 19th, and shock horror, the place wasn't open. So and I'm happy with that information being spread.
And thank you, James. I think our industry certainly understands that this is largely not just your decision, it's the decision of others. You mentioned this before, Michael Bridge, in terms of the reopening process, and did you have something more to add to that?
Yeah, and look, can I just say this doesn't in any way set aside what James has said, because that's very true, and this is all subject to change with very little notice, particularly on health grounds. But I've just received advice from the Chief Minister, who says he's very confident of a June 5 lifting of the biosecurity zones. Now, this doesn't set aside, obviously, Kakadu and Uluru-Kata, given that they're federally managed parks. He's been working with the land councils and has a very positive response from the land councils. There's some administrative challenges in June 5, but he's confident in getting through those, and says if not June 5, then definitely June 18. Now, that's all subject to all the things that James just mentioned and all the other challenges in the current environment. However, I think June 19 is looking very good, and hopefully and potentially June 5 for the long weekend.
Wow. Well, that's a lot of information for our members online to take in, as it is. So we're hearing that just for the first time. Patrick Bedford, Chair of Tourism Central Australia, Uluru-Kata is central as a number of NT parks for tourism, and you are completely ring-fenced in Alice Springs by biosecurity areas. What questions do you have on behalf of tourism operators in the Red Centre? For James?
Firstly, it's great that the biozones will be lifted around Alice Springs, because it's pretty much in 15 kilometres of any direction of Alice Springs. There is restrictions in there, and Alice Springians feel that we're pretty much in a prison, even though we had the freedom to move around. So those being lifted would be absolutely great. My question, James, is probably towards the border restrictions are going to be lifted later in the year, which is understandable. However, the park tickets and the fees being waived till the end of March is going to be not really much help. Like you mentioned, that the international visitors aren't going to be here. And with that, do you not think it's prevalent that you extend the park entry ticket waiver for at least maybe 12 months, if not for the touring season, and if not that, at least for the operators? Like, these are the operators in the national parks, the ones bringing the tourists in, and if they're not going to get a support and a kind of a helping hand from parks, because they've been bringing travelers in there for years, it needs to be that they really get that support from parks to remove that ticket waiver for at least 12 months, or if not that, at least the touring season. Can I get your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so look, mate, just I think I touched on part of this, but on the operators' fees and charges, so we've waived or otherwise reimbursed those for the full 15 months, so 1st of January this year, so backdated to the 1st of January before this thing became an issue, and they're running that through to March next year, so that's a full 15-month waiver or reimbursement for those who've paid multi-year fees. At the moment, as I said, I've got financial coverage to run the visitor fee waiver for the 10 months up to the end of this calendar year. And I'm sure there'll be lots of conversations between now and then about whether or not it'll be extended. I don't have financial cover for that. And I would be trading insolvent if I don't have that. So we bring in about $34 million of our $88 million a year. It costs to run our parks, comes from visitor and tourism operator fees. So I can't trade insolvent. So look, I'd love to say that I could do that today, but I'm sure that conversation will be had at some length between now and the end of the financial year, end of the calendar year. I understand the position, but the government's also made it very clear to me that their support for that waiver is very much a time-limited offer and very much temporary at the moment. So I don't want to give people false hope, but I hear what you're saying. I think it's good we've done the operator, the full waiver for the 15 months for operators. I think that's a few $1 million, but it's better a few $1 million in your pocket than mine, I think, at the moment in terms of cash flow, and or in the government's. But the visitor fees here is just the 10 months for the moment. So look, I hear you, and we'll take that back.
My second question around infrastructure in the Uluru National Park. So what is happening there? Because from an operator point of view, Sunset Viewing Area, for example, Tjuta Car Park, there's no toilets in those areas. And for Australia, Uluru being one of the biggest draw cards in the Northern Territory, from my point of view, like, that should be there, and it should be there years ago. Can you give me some thought process around that? Because when we come back to business in the new normal next year, we need to be really stepping up our game and having the facilities there. So
you're spot on, Patrick. And look, I've been in the job now for 17 months, and one of the things I was just shocked at was how run down the infrastructure across our parks is, in particular the two territory parks. And so we were really lucky to get the $216 million with matching $135 million from the NT government for Kakadu last year, and that'll go a long way to fixing some of the challenges up there. Uluru is obviously the next cab off the rank, and we've actually over the last few weeks actually done a few things to a number of the car parks and a number of the roads and tracks around Uluru. So once you get back in, you'll notice a few changes, which is good. We've also been really lucky this week to sign an agreement with Voyagers to get 150 of their staff in at the moment as volunteers in a biosecurity safe way to do some further work on the park and help us with some of those facilities. The Kakadu Board of Management, Uluru Board of Management's actually meeting at the end of this month, and hopefully at that stage finalising the infrastructure plan for the park, which, can I assure you, includes a nice new set of toilets for the Sunset Viewing Area. So my challenge then will be paying for it. Obviously, government's going to be pulled in many different directions at the moment, but all I can do is please ask all of you to contact whoever you think you should contact, and put these, in terms of politicians, and put these calls to them, because there's a long queue at every minister's door at the moment asking them for money, and there's a polite inquiries will help me a lot in terms of the work that I'm doing behind the scenes to try and get more money out of government. We've got an opportunity at the moment to do infrastructure spends, and you mentioned Chris and Ben earlier, Glenn. I'm really keen to get on with a really big infrastructure spend in both the territory parks, and using mostly Territorian labour early on. We need somewhere for them to stay, so obviously using places like the Cooinda or Voyagers as places for workers, for construction workers to stay is obviously a real good option in the short term as well. So very, very, very keen. So if I can just encourage you to put pressure politely where it belongs, and that would be very helpful. Patrick?
Thank you for that.
James, just a quick one. Last time we held a forum, it was we all gathered out for Kakadu out at the airport That was what, 2.5 months ago, I think it was.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, and
Seems like a lifetime ago, Glenn, given it was pre-COVID, I think so.
Yes, it was, whilst it was on our radar, there was some concerns being raised about feeds, and we weren't too sure, and it was more about the impact that was going to happen on the international markets, not to nearly the degree that it has had here. I feel like that the closure in the biosecurity has also stopped a lot of the consultants and outside workers that Parks Australia had engaged in going in. So is it right in understanding that effectively this has delayed a lot of that which would have been planned to have been done? And in order to pick up speed on this and to get that happening, Parks Australia will require a lot more financial support from the Australian government in order to expedite these processes. More people on the ground, more vehicles on roads, more tradies.
To some extent, it's the biggest impact's been the challenge to consultation. So I'm stuck here in Canberra, so we can't go anywhere, fly anywhere. We've got issues around the ability of our consultants to get out and do traditional owner consultations. That's been the biggest issue at the moment. So I'm legally obliged, as are others, myself included, to undertake consultations with traditional owners. And at the moment, we can't, the engineers and experts and others that need to go in and do those consultations with people on the ground, we've had some challenges getting them in, and especially when they've been interstate, it's been impossible. So there has, as I said, I think during the speech, we've had probably a month or two of delay in that, but it's more about the consultations than actually getting the work underway. A lot of that work wouldn't have been able to start till the ground was dried out anyway, so we've probably lost a month or two. I don't think it's a resourcing challenge so much as it's going to be everything's going to be happening at once. So, I'm very hopeful we get this through the board. I'm very hopeful we get NLC and ARPA clearances quickly. That might be optimistic, but, 10 weeks ago, Northern Land Council couldn't contemplate doing any consultation. To their credit, they're now back doing that. It's all been very, very busy, and obviously people, as I said, we've been focused on keeping people safe. And now we've got the sort of recovery phase on it. So I think we've lost, I'd say 8 weeks, something like that, Glenn. But hopefully able to get that back on track. Now, if there's further, cases, and then we can't, the biosecurity zone stay in place, or, all bets will be off. But my hope is we'll get this largely back on track by the middle of the year. So, and a lot of that work will get back underway. So, I don't think it's a resourcing challenge as much as a timing challenge. That might impact some of those timelines.
Yeah, right. Okay. We certainly are getting some feedback on the chat just around in regard to people's concerns in being able to access, and their businesses are stalled for so long, and any opportunity for them to get back into and get up and operational. The real challenge we've got, and I'm sure it's not lost on either yourself, James, or Sally, is that, again, from a tourism industry perspective, people can get in their car and visit the parks once they open. Without the borders coming down, then there practically is no real tourism for a lot of our traditional tour operators. Now, that said, our tour operators are working overtime to re-engineer their business to how can they market it, present it, distribute that to a resident market to make it as attractive as it possibly can be in order to get their vehicles running again, to get their restaurants back up and running again. But this is an enormous challenge, and any opportunity that can be given to help support that industry now is what keeps that infrastructure in place in 2021 and beyond when people come on board. There is a topic that I'd like to raise just before, and it is off piece from what we're talking about COVID, but it is the opportunity, and the question's been asked there, and it's one that's been raised through the Board of Tourism top end, and that's gamba grass. So in terms of just looking for a quick update here around eradication of gamba grass, because our tourism industry genuinely fears this could be bigger than cane toads for the Northern Territory, and then the way that's going. And so what are your thoughts on what's happening, if I might throw to Sally Egan, around gamba grass and what parks are doing and what more can be done, and what can the industry be doing in order to support you to get the resources you need?
I think it was particular to Litchfield.
Yes.
Yes. So the good news is in Litchfield this financial year is we're going to do as much work on gamba grass in Litchfield as we possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
So there will be a bit of a jump in activity in that space this year, but there is no new money for gamba grass control or even weed control across the territory more broadly. And I'm not expecting to speak frankly. I'm not expecting that resources will be more readily available going forward than they currently are. There are some big picture things going on behind the scenes. So most conservation organisations and land management organisations across Australia have joined forces with Pew and have put in a huge bid to the federal government to get some, it's pitched as an economic stimulus package, saying we can get people working on country, working on weed control, working on, having our land in better condition. So we're all watching that with a little bit of hope. It might do something.
Yep.
But in the meantime, in the NT, it really is a case of we just have to continue to prioritise from the rats and mice money that's available.
Yeah. Okay. And because I take this opportunity not to ambush you with that, Sally, but it's been raised by many of our members, especially around Litchfield, and their concerns are that that's spreading further afield down to Nipmuc, the potential for that to get up into Kakadu and to become a real problem. What about from yourself, James?
Yeah, look, so we do have small pockets of gamba grass already inside Kakadu in the southeast corner there from those pastoral areas and down into Nipmuc. But we were actually pretty lucky last year. We were able to sign up the first carbon farming agreement, and as part of that revenue, we'll be able to sell carbon credits very shortly. So we've been banking carbon credits in Kakadu for a number of years in a couple of the areas. So we've got several $1 million worth of carbon credits sort of sitting in the bank at the moment. And as Sally mentioned, we're very keen to look at working on country and other opportunities to engage people to address gamba grass threats, because there's a direct feedback loop. So for people who don't know, if you have gamba grass in an area that you're claiming as carbon credits, you can't claim it. So we think there's a nice feedback loop there to sort of use that revenue to put money back into working on country opportunities for traditional owners and their families and others out there to get that work cleaned up. Now, I think it's going to be an ongoing challenge. I don't think it's going to go anytime soon. So this does need to be a coordinated program between ourselves and Northern Territory and private business to keep this thing under control. So we're very keen to keep it out of Kakadu in any major way. So but I think at the moment we've got some resourcing, some light at the end of the tunnel to help us do that in the short term.
Okay, thank you. It's certainly an area of grave concern to the tourism industry. Mike Scott,
did you see the question there from Wes about windows on the wetland?
There was a question there. I saw that windows on the wetland.
Comments.
And Wes, your comment there that you've heard windows on the wetland are referred to as windows on the weeds a couple of weeks ago, and certainly that I think that represents a challenge that the whole industry feels, that this is such an intrusive weed that's moving at such pace and really affects. If I could, and we'll bring that to an end, but I think probably one of the key aspects here is a question that we posed to Sally, and we've also posed to yourself, James, is that opportunity for the tourism industry to be prepared, and if there are certain aspects of access to particular parks, of some of our parks where you're looking for, where you have capacity issues, that you want that managed by responsible accredited tour operators, then our tourism industry not only would like to be that, but financially desperately need and are searching for some opportunities. And understand that gets some pushback from constituents who say, why can't I drive my Hilux and jump in with my esky beside the swimming hole? But at the end of the day too, people can, they can still access these places, but it's being able to share that and help our visitor economy. So from a Kakadu and from an Uluru perspective, tour operators that had some ideas along that to take that opportunity, how would they get that information to you, James?
So either come back through me or through either of the park managers, so Russell and Di Scopel, or through the relevant SES. So Brant Smith's also on this line, or Carl Dyson. But I'm happy for my details to be shared. Glenn, if people haven't got them, both my mobile and email, I think you've got them all. So you can send it out to your members, and if they fire an email to me, I can make sure it gets to the right place. But just to be really clear, we are very keen to explore those sorts of opportunities, and don't have any real problems with saying this is a place that only these types of people can access, so too bad to everybody else. Mm-hmm. But we do need to do some consultations with traditional owners in those areas, and that's easier to do at Uluru reasonably quickly, but Kakadu can be a bit time consuming, especially at the moment where we can't get people in and out because of weather and the biosecurity restrictions. So the sooner people can reach out to us, the better.
Okay, great. And Sally?
Yeah, so for NT parks, we do have an obligation about free access to people who want to go to a national park. So for us, it would always be a mixture, I think, of what is a special experience and an over above experience, but there also needs to be a good offering of things that people can just go and do as a free and independent traveller. So if there are places in particular where we have a problem, or we might be able to get people moving into there in a managed scenario where we wouldn't be able to just open the park for free and independent travellers, that's a great idea. And going forward, if there are particular experiences that tourism operators want to build up with parks NT support, and we do have a lot of them, you know, ideas about dropping people in the bush and walking them out and all those special over and above things that we do, then we're always keen to hear about those as well. For places like Litchfield, even though it is so tempting for me to say, no, it's closed and you can only go in there with a managed tour, I think we wouldn't be able to sustain that position. People would see that as a huge impost on their rights.
I think the industry understands that, but I think the message that I've heard in that is that you're up to taking ideas on board, and for people and how they can do that in the interest of traditional owners and protecting the land and also the tourism economy. I'll take Patrick. Is there anything further from Central Australia?
There's just one question around if they are, James, if you're still going ahead with the increase in the park ticket to Uluru National Park to, is it $38.50? Are you still going ahead with that next year?
Yeah, so Patrick, that's now built into the regulations, and we expect that to come into force when park entry fees are reimposed.
Okay. Mike Scott. Okay. Michael Bridge. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. It's 9:50 here in Territory time. I want to thank all the members. We've had over 140 members on board this morning, I should say. Thank you very much for your questions. We can't possibly get to all those questions, but we will be following those questions up and getting you the answers wherever we can. Thank you to the members of Tourism Top End, Tourism Central Australia, Hospitality NT, Litchfield Tourism, Catherine Tourism Group, East Arnhem Land Tourism Association, also Darwin City Waterfront Retailers Association. James Findlay, thank you very much for your time this morning. I know that we've kept you a bit longer than anticipated and you do have to rush to another meeting. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sally Egan, for coming and sharing us. I take the opportunity for everyone still online to remind that everything that was shared today was under a Chatham House rule. So it's all for the benefit of us to think about and how we use it in our business. Exciting news, and we'll keep let's keep an eye out for the media as to what happens about the biozones lifting. A plug for next week, we have Philippa Harrison. She's the Managing Director of Tourism Australia. She'll be joining us to talk about the new national domestic marketing campaign, which is Live from Australia, which is the latest iteration of With Australia from Love. And we've asked Pip to particularly give it an NT context and to really give us some understanding of how tourism operators across the territory can benefit from that which is going to be being done by Tourism Australia, remembering that they haven't been in the domestic marketing scene for many years. So to all our speakers this morning, thank you very much. Thank you everyone who's joined in. Have a great week. Keep your questions firing. We're all here to help wherever we can. Thank you.